Have you ever wondered what happens to a celebrity's fortune after they die? What bitter feuds emerge from the shadows when fame meets mortality? Number 10. Prince. When the musical icon Prince died suddenly in 2016 without a will, did anyone expect the chaos that followed? The Purple Rain singer's $300 million estate became the center of one of the most complicated celebrity estate battles in recent history. Prince's 6 siblings found themselves thrust into a legal nightmare that dragged on for years. The Minnesota courts had to determine who among his relatives had legitimate claims to his vast fortune, including his extensive music catalog, Paisley Park estate, and unreleased recordings. The battle became so complex that the administrator of the estate, Comerica Bank and Trust, found itself at odds with Prince's heirs over everything from how to manage his legacy to the valuation of his intellectual property. Meanwhile, hundreds of people came forward claiming to be Prince's children, siblings, or other relatives entitled to a piece of the pie. DNA testing became a critical component as the courts worked to separate legitimate heirs from opportunists. What made Prince's case particularly difficult was his perfectionism and privacy in life extending into complications after death. He reportedly kept much of his business dealings in his head rather than on paper. The IRS eventually entered the fray, claiming the estate administrators had severely undervalued Prince's assets. The tax agency believed the estate was worth double what executors claimed, leading to potential tax bills in the hundreds of millions. By the time the estate was finally settled in 2022, 6 years after his death, millions had been spent on legal fees, and the value of what could have gone to his heirs was significantly diminished. Number 9. Jimi Hendrix. When guitar legend Jimi Hendrix died in 1970 at just 27 years old, could anyone have predicted the 5 decades of legal warfare that would follow? Since Hendrix died without a will, his father Al initially inherited everything. The battle for control of Jimi's estate, particularly his valuable music rights, became one of the longest-running posthumous legal sagas in music history. The conflict intensified when Al Hendrix established Experience Hendrix LLC to manage his son's legacy. After Al's death in 2002, control passed to Jimi's stepsister Janie, sparking fierce opposition from other family members, particularly Jimi's brother Leon. For years, Leon challenged Janie's control, claiming she manipulated their elderly father into cutting other family members out of the estate management. The situation grew even more complicated when companies began marketing Hendrix-branded merchandise without the estate's permission. Experience Hendrix LLC found itself constantly fighting unauthorized use of Hendrix's image and music. One particularly notable case involved Hendrix's image being used to sell vodka, which the estate felt tarnished the musician's legacy given that alcohol had contributed to his death. The legal battles became so convoluted that courts in different states sometimes reached contradictory rulings about who had rights to what aspects of the Hendrix legacy. Even today, new legal challenges occasionally emerge, proving that for some iconic celebrities, death doesn't end the fight over their artistic and financial legacy, it only transforms it. Number 8. Michael Jackson. Did anyone anticipate the tsunami of legal disputes that would follow the king of pop's shocking death in 2009? Michael Jackson's estate, potentially worth over $1 billion, became ground zero for one of the most complex posthumous legal battles ever seen. The initial conflict centered on Jackson's will, which named his mother Catherine as guardian of his 3 children and attorney John Branca and music executive John McClain as executors of his estate. Jackson's father Joe was notably excluded, as were his siblings, several of whom contested the will's validity. They claimed Michael wouldn't have chosen Branca, arguing the document was a fabrication and that Michael was actually in New York, not Los Angeles, when the will was allegedly signed. Meanwhile, the estate faced a staggering $500 million in debt at the time of Jackson's death. The executors orchestrated remarkable financial moves, including negotiating a record-breaking $250 million deal with Sony for rights to Jackson's music catalog. This business acumen dramatically reversed Jackson's financial situation posthumously, but further angered family members who felt excluded. The IRS entered the battle, claiming the estate undervalued Jackson's assets by hundreds of millions of dollars. The tax agency and the estate disagreed dramatically on the value of Jackson's name and likeness rights at the time of his death, with the IRS initially claiming they were worth $434 million, while the estate valued them at just $2,105, a reflection of how Jackson's reputation had suffered before death due to child abuse allegations. Adding another layer of complexity, creditors filed numerous claims against the estate, some legitimate and others questionable. Several women even came forward claiming to be the real mother of Jackson's children. The most troubling development came years after his death, when new allegations of child sexual abuse emerged in the documentary Leaving Neverland, creating fresh legal challenges for the estate as it fought to protect Jackson's legacy and the value of his brand. Number 7. Marilyn Monroe. How does one of Hollywood's most iconic sex symbols continue to generate legal disputes decades after her death? When Marilyn Monroe died in 1962, she left the majority of her estate to her acting coach Lee Strasberg. The initial value wasn't enormous, about $800,000, but the rights to her image would eventually become worth millions. The real legal drama began after Strasberg's death, when control passed to his third wife, Anna Strasberg, who had never even met Monroe. Anna aggressively protected and marketed Monroe's image, creating a corporation called Marilyn Monroe LLC and pursuing licensing deals that generated substantial income. Monroe's image appeared on everything from wine bottles to clothing lines, becoming one of the most profitable posthumous celebrity brands in history. In 2005, courts had to address a fundamental question. Did Monroe actually own her publicity rights at death, and could she transfer them through her will? The answer depended on whether Monroe was legally a resident of California or New York when she died, as the states had different laws regarding posthumous publicity rights. After complex litigation, courts ultimately ruled that Monroe was a New York resident, meaning her publicity rights terminated at death, a devastating blow to the estate's control. Adding another dimension to the legal saga, photographers who had taken famous images of Monroe found themselves in battles with the estate over who owned the rights to those photographs. Meanwhile, distant relatives occasionally emerged, claiming to be legitimate heirs entitled to portions of the still lucrative Monroe estate. Even Monroe's personal items became subjects of dispute, with collectors and the estate fighting over the provenance and ownership of dresses, jewelry, and other memorabilia that command premium prices at auction. Number 6. Bob Marley. Can you imagine leaving behind a reggae empire with no will to guide its future? When Bob Marley died from cancer in 1981 at age 36, Jamaican law dictated that his assets be divided among his wife and children, but determining exactly who qualified proved extraordinarily difficult. Marley had 11 recognized children with 7 different women, creating an immediate challenge for estate administration. His wife Rita claimed she was entitled to a larger share based on Jamaican customs, while the other mothers of his children argued for equal recognition. The situation grew even more complicated when individuals came forward claiming to be additional biological children of the reggae superstar. The most contentious battles, however, centered on Marley's music catalog and image rights. His former manager Danny Sims claimed ownership of much of Marley's early music through contracts Marley had signed before becoming famous. This led to decades of litigation over who controlled the rights to some of Marley's most iconic songs. The legal struggles took a particularly dark turn when allegations emerged that documents had been forged to transfer ownership of some of Marley's music publishing companies. Several individuals were eventually criminally charged with attempting to steal portions of the Marley estate through document fraud. By the 1990s, the estate had consolidated control under a company called 56 Hope Road Music, managed by some of Marley's family members, but disputes among the heirs continue periodically to this day. Despite these challenges, the Marley family eventually transformed Bob's legacy into a global brand worth hundreds of millions, including the successful House of Marley Electronics line and Marley Coffee, proving that sometimes families can ultimately overcome inheritance battles to build something their famous relative would have been proud of. Number 5. Whitney Houston. When Whitney Houston's crystal voice was silenced in 2012, who knew her death would trigger a series of heartbreaking legal conflicts? Houston's $20 million estate was left to her only daughter, Bobbi Kristina Brown, to be distributed in installments as she reached certain age milestones. This seemingly straightforward arrangement became tragically complicated when Bobbi Kristina herself was found unconscious in a bathtub, eerily similar to her mother's death, and passed away in 2015 at just 22. The question of who would inherit Houston's fortune then turned into a fierce battle between the Houston and Brown families. Bobby Brown, Whitney's ex-husband and Bobbi Kristina's father, claimed rights to the estate as her next of kin. Meanwhile, Whitney's mother Cissy and brothers argued that Whitney's original intention was for her wealth to stay within the Houston family if anything happened to Bobbi Kristina. Complicating matters further was Nick Gordon, who had been raised as Whitney's informal adopted son before developing a romantic relationship with Bobbi Kristina after Whitney's death. Though Gordon claimed he and Bobbi Kristina had married, the Houston family disputed this, and Gordon was later found legally responsible for Bobbi Kristina's death in a civil suit, resulting in a $36 million judgment against him. The estate also faced challenges regarding Houston's music rights, with her record label engaging in disputes over digital royalties and posthumous releases. Meanwhile, various business associates emerged with claims against the estate, including a company that alleged it was owed $100,000 for securing Houston performance deals before her death. Even Houston's valuable collection of designer gowns and stage costumes became the subject of ownership disputes between the estate and various auction houses. Number 4. James Brown. Do you know what happens when the godfather of soul leaves behind a controversial will and multiple families? When James Brown died on Christmas Day 2006, he left behind an estate worth an estimated $100 million, along with one of the most convoluted legal situations in music history. Brown's will directed that the majority of his assets go into a charitable trust to provide scholarships for underprivileged children in South Carolina and Georgia. However, he had excluded most of his recognized children and his fourth wife, Tomie Ray Heine, prompting immediate legal challenges. Heine claimed she was Brown's legitimate widow, though questions about whether her previous marriage had been properly annulled complicated her status. The situation grew so chaotic that the South Carolina Supreme Court eventually intervened multiple times. In 2013, after nearly 7 years of litigation, the court upheld Brown's original wish for a charitable trust but set aside 25% of the estate for his children and 25% for Heine. However, in 2020, the same court reversed course, ruling that Heine was never legally married to Brown due to her prior marriage not being properly dissolved. Throughout these battles, Brown's estate was neglected. His 60-acre estate in South Carolina fell into disrepair, and opportunities to monetize his music catalog were missed during years of legal gridlock. State officials were accused of mismanaging the estate and forcing disadvantaged settlement terms on family members. Meanwhile, more than a dozen people came forward claiming to be Brown's unacknowledged biological children, further complicating the inheritance picture. Adding another layer of controversy, Brown's family raised questions about the circumstances of his death, with some suggesting foul play allegations that never led to criminal charges but added emotional tension to the already fraught inheritance dispute. Even after more than 15 years, aspects of Brown's estate remain unsettled, with his children continuing to challenge various court decisions and the charitable trust still not fully operational as Brown intended. Number 3. Robin Williams. How does a beloved comedian's meticulous estate planning still lead to bitter disputes? When Robin Williams died by suicide in 2014, he left behind a carefully structured will and trust that he hoped would prevent conflicts. Williams explicitly divided his $100 million estate among his 3 children from 2 marriages, while creating a separate trust for his 3rd wife, Susan Schneider Williams. Despite these precautions, disagreements quickly emerged between Susan and Williams' children, Zach, Zelda, and Cody. The primary dispute centered on the contents of the Tiburon, California home where Williams died and Susan continued to live. While Susan was granted the home and its contents, the children were entitled to Williams' personal items from the residence. The definition of what constituted personal items became fiercely contested. Susan argued that certain items in the home, including his extensive watch collection, should remain with her as they weren't specifically earmarked for the children. Meanwhile, the children felt they were being denied meaningful mementos of their father. The dispute became public and increasingly bitter, with Susan claiming she was being treated unfairly while still mourning her husband. What made Williams' case particularly poignant was that he had been diagnosed with Lewy body dementia before his death, a condition only discovered during his autopsy, raising questions about his mental state in his final amendments to his estate plan. The legal battle was eventually settled privately in 2015, with both sides releasing a statement expressing satisfaction with the resolution while keeping the details confidential. The Williams case demonstrated that even careful estate planning can't always prevent emotional conflicts when grief-stricken family members interpret the same documents differently. The dispute also revealed how the most valuable assets in celebrity estates aren't always financial. Sometimes the most contested items are those with purely sentimental value, connecting loved ones to the deceased's memory. Number 2. Elvis Presley. How did the king of rock and roll's death transform a financially struggling musician into a posthumous entertainment empire? When Elvis Presley died in 1977, his estate was worth only about $5 million, and Graceland was actually costing around $500,000 annually to maintain. The financial situation was so dire that his father Vernon, who inherited control of the estate, considered selling Graceland. After Vernon's death in 1979, control passed to Elvis' only child, Lisa Marie Presley, with her mother Priscilla serving as executor until Lisa Marie reached adulthood. Priscilla made the pivotal decision to open Graceland to the public in 1982, turning Elvis' financial legacy around and creating one of the most visited private homes in America, second only to the White House. However, legal disputes followed the Presley estate for decades. Lisa Marie's decision to sell 85% of Elvis Presley Enterprises to entertainment company CKX, later acquired by Authentic Brands Group, in 2005 for approximately $100 million led to financial complications. She later sued her business manager Barry Siegel, claiming he squandered her inheritance through poor investments, including the sale of her stake in Elvis Presley Enterprises. Elvis' estate also faced continuous copyright and royalty disputes. The most noteworthy centered around rights to Elvis' pre-1973 recordings. RCA had purchased these rights from Elvis in 1973 for $5,400,000, which seemed substantial at the time but proved to be a fraction of their eventual worth. The estate and Sony BMG, which later acquired RCA, engaged in ongoing negotiations and disputes over digital rights and reissues of this material. After Lisa Marie's unexpected death in 2023, new legal battles emerged between her daughter Riley Keough and her mother Priscilla over control of Lisa Marie's trust, which included her remaining interests in Graceland and Elvis Presley Enterprises. While initially contentious, with Priscilla challenging a 2016 amendment that removed her as trustee, the dispute was settled with Riley becoming the sole trustee of her mother's estate, maintaining the Presley legacy within the direct bloodline. Number 1. Anna Nicole Smith. Can a former Playboy model's death create a legal battle so complex it reaches the Supreme Court? When Anna Nicole Smith died of an accidental drug overdose in 2007, she left behind a 5-month-old daughter, Dannylyn, and a tangle of legal disputes so convoluted they would take years to unravel. The central conflict dated back to Smith's marriage to oil billionaire J. Howard Marshall, who was 63 years her senior and died a year after their wedding. Marshall's will left his estimated $1.6 billion fortune to his son Pierce, completely excluding Smith. She challenged the will, claiming Marshall had verbally promised her half his estate. This dispute evolved into a 15-year legal saga that continued long after both Smith and Pierce Marshall had died. The inheritance case reached the U.S. Supreme Court twice, once regarding jurisdictional issues and again concerning bankruptcy court authority. Eventually, in 2011, the Supreme Court ruled against Smith's estate, effectively ending her claim to the Marshall fortune. By this point, the only potential beneficiary was Smith's daughter Danielyn. Simultaneously after Smith's death, a separate legal battle erupted over paternity and custody of Danielyn. At least 3 men claimed to be the father: Smith's lawyer Howard K. Stern, named as the father on the birth certificate, photographer Larry Burkhead, and Prince Frederick von Anhalt, the husband of actress Zsa Gabor. DNA testing eventually established Burkhead as the biological father, and he gained custody of Danielyn. The controversies continued with disputes over Smith's burial location, with her mother wanting her buried in Texas, while Stern advocated for the Bahamas next to Smith's deceased son Daniel. The judge in this case broke down in tears while rendering his decision, demonstrating the emotional intensity surrounding Smith even after death. Adding a final tragic dimension, there were investigations into whether anyone should be criminally charged for supplying the prescription medications that led to Smith's fatal overdose, with Stern and 2 doctors eventually facing charges, though most were later dismissed. Have celebrity deaths always been followed by such complex legal battles, or has the modern entertainment industry created new forms of posthumous conflict we're only beginning to understand?